We begin our journey in the quiet aftermath of the First Age, in a Middle-earth already scarred by battles, whose echoes still shape the lands and hearts of its inhabitants. The air is heavy with memory, and even the winds seem to carry the weight of events long past. Here, in this reflective silence, we can perceive the subtler threads of power, those that move not through armies or conquest, but through presence, dread, and the very structure of the world itself. Gandalf, known to some as Mithrandir, moves within these threads with a mixture of curiosity and cautious respect. He observes, learns, and, when necessary, restrains. Yet some forces, he knows, are beyond even his careful foresight. The Balrog is one such force. Not a dark lord bent upon conquest, nor a schemer of political dominion. The Balrog embodies a more elemental, more ancient terror. A reminder that certain powers predate even Sauron, and that even the wisest among the Astari must approach them with measured vigilance. In this chapter, we trace the origins of that terror, the weight it casts across ages. Long before Sauron rose in Mordor, before rings were forged and kingdoms fell, there existed beings whose very essence was tied to the world's formation. The Valar shaped Middle-earth, but so too did the rebellious spirits of the first darkness, the Maiar, who took form in fire and shadow. The Balrogs, or Valeraukar as they were once known, were servants of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, yet their nature surpassed mere servitude. They were not merely instruments of tyranny, but living embodiments of a kind of primordial entropy, a force that defied the measured plans of gods and kings alike. Their presence, subtle or overt, alters landscapes and histories alike. Where Sauron seeks dominion, the Balrog disrupts, consumes, and reshapes without design. A slow, inexorable pressure that bends the fates of mortals and immortals in ways that are often imperceptible until the moment of reckoning. Consider Moria, that vast and echoing labyrinth beneath the misty mountains. Here, in the stillness of abandoned halls and collapsed stairways, one can sense the residue of such forces. The dwarves dug deep, seeking Mithril and the treasures of the earth, yet unknowingly approached the lair of one of these ancient shadows. Gandalf's apprehension, recorded subtly in the accounts of those who journeyed with him, is not born of fear alone, but of recognition. The Balrog does not act with ambition or strategy alone. It acts with a depth of memory and an instinct that is both alien and ancient. Even in the calmest moments, the air of Moria carries a warning. Footfalls echo differently. Shadows gather where light should suffice. The very stone seems to remember fires long extinguished. This is not the calculated dread of Sauron's machinations, but the subtle, patient pressure of a force older than the kingdoms of men and elves, a reminder that power without structure can be equally, if not more, formidable. Yet Gandalf's concern is measured, never panicked. He is, after all, one of the Astari, emissaries charged with guidance rather than domination. His mandate is clear: to counsel, to observe, to steer rather than strike with unchecked might. And yet, this very mandate places him in a delicate position. The Balrog, bound neither by duty nor by the ambitions that constrain Sauron, exists outside the familiar frameworks of strategy and governance. Its motives, though often seeming simple, carry the weight of ages and indifference to mortal or immortal alike. Gandalf, in his quiet moments of reflection, understands that confronting such a being is not merely a test of courage or skill, but of insight, foresight, and the patience to act at the precise moment when action becomes necessity rather than reaction. The distinction between Sauron and the Balrog becomes evident through this lens. Sauron's threat is vast and terrifying, yes, yet it is structured. His ambition is comprehensible, his strategies predictable, his weaknesses identifiable. The Balrog, by contrast, operates on a principle that defies conventional understanding. It moves according to patterns that are both instinctual and ancient, reacting not merely to immediate circumstances, but to currents that span centuries. Gandalf's fear, then, is not irrational. It is a recognition that the world contains powers that cannot be entirely known, contained, or directed. And yet, in this recognition lies not despair, but responsibility, a careful, vigilant stewardship of knowledge and action, a willingness to observe and respect forces that might, if provoked recklessly, overwhelm even the wisest of counselors. Breadcrumbs of these truths appear subtly throughout the landscapes and histories Gandalf navigates. The scars of past conflicts, the lingering unrest of unsettled territories, and the artifacts left behind by those who once faced these forces all hint at a hierarchy of power, not immediately apparent. In some sense, fear here is a tool, a calibrating instrument of wisdom rather than a paralyzing sentiment. Gandalf's role is to discern when the presence of such a force demands intervention, when patience will suffice, and when prudence must yield to decisive action. This balance, delicate and precise, is at the heart of his approach to Middle-earth's hidden terrors. As we close this chapter, we are left with a question that will guide much of our journey. What distinguishes the ancient terror of the Balrog from the structured domination of Sauron? And why does Gandalf approach one with a cautious dread that surpasses even his wariness of the Dark Lord? This question gently leads us to the next chapter, where we will trace the origin of the Balrog and explore the fiery, shadowed history that made it a force beyond ambition, beyond tyranny, and yet intimately tied to the fate of the world. It is in understanding this origin that we begin to appreciate why Gandalf's fear, though measured, resonates with both cosmic and personal significance, setting the stage for a journey into darkness that is as contemplative as it is revealing. As we leave the reflective quiet of the First Age behind, we turn our attention to the origins of the Balrogs and the deeper currents of power that shape Middle-earth. Gandalf's apprehension, as we observed, is rooted in knowledge not only of events, but of enduring forces. To understand why he regards the Balrog with greater dread than even Sauron, we must consider the nature of these beings and their place in the cosmic order. The Balrogs were not born of ambition or desire, but of essence. They are Maiar, spirits of the same order as Gandalf himself, yet they fell into shadow under Morgoth's influence, corrupted not merely by choice, but by the gravitational pull of a force older than the shaping of the lands. Their fire is not the simple combustion of physical flame. It is a reflection of cosmic entropy, a lingering echo of the discord that preceded the world's formation. In the quiet corners of Gandalf's mind, he traces the lineage of these entities. The Valar, tasked with guiding the shaping of Arda, imbued it with order and intention, seeking to harmonize creation. Yet within this design existed the potential for deviation, a capacity for chaos that Morgoth exploited with patient cunning. Some of the Maiar, drawn to his rebellion, were seduced not by the promise of conquest alone, but by the raw intensity of primordial energy. The Balrogs became living conduits of this energy, their existence a bridge between the structured world of the Valar and the restless, chaotic void beyond. It is here that Gandalf's fear finds context. He is confronted with a being whose power is both ancient and independent, whose motives are not bound by strategy, ambition, or even malice in the human sense, but by the sheer persistence of an elemental force that predates the calculated tyranny of Sauron. Middle-earth bears the subtle marks of this influence. In lands touched by Balrogs, mountains shift unexpectedly, shadows linger longer than reason dictates, and heat can radiate without flame. The dwarves, diligent and precise in their craftsmanship, discovered these truths unwittingly as they dug too deep beneath Khazad-dûm. They encountered not a schemer to be outwitted, but a force to be respected, one that could not be reasoned with or anticipated in familiar ways. Gandalf, understanding both the dwarves' courage and their vulnerability, recognizes that the cost of underestimating such beings is not merely physical ruin, but a corruption of history itself, a disturbance of the carefully balanced currents that govern the world. Here, in this realization, he calibrates his vigilance. Fear is not weakness, but a measure of awareness, an acknowledgement of the limits of foresight, when facing entities rooted in the very fabric of Arda. The mechanisms of the Balrog's power are subtle and intertwined with its origin. Unlike Sauron, whose dominion depends upon coercion, manipulation, and the forging of artifacts like the One Ring, the Balrog exerts influence by its mere presence. Its shadow bends light, its voice bends will, and its movement bends expectation. This is not to suggest conscious strategy in the human sense, but rather a natural consequence of its ancient essence. Fire and shadow are not tools, they are extensions of being. The Balrog's actions ripple outward, creating effects that the most meticulous planners might fail to predict. Gandalf, trained to perceive patterns and anticipate outcomes, notes the uniqueness of this power. It cannot be countered with armies alone, nor can treaties restrain it. It exists, and it persists, patient and enduring. Yet within this recognition of danger lies also a sense of inevitability. Gandalf perceives the Balrog not merely as an adversary, but as a necessary presence in the unfolding story of Middle-earth. Its existence illuminates limits, the limits of mortals, of immortals, and of the Istari themselves. By understanding the Balrog, Gandalf discerns principles of power and consequence that apply far beyond Moria's stone halls. Fear, in this context, is instructive. It guides action, informs strategy, and shapes the manner in which one engages with both visible and unseen threats. The Istari are not agents of domination. Their role is one of guidance, restraint, and timing. The Balrog challenges this mandate, not by intent, but by the raw nature of its being, forcing Gandalf to reconcile duty with prudence, courage with patience. Breadcrumbs of this dynamic are scattered through history and legend. The dwarves' inscriptions, the hidden chambers of the deep places, and the faint echoes of ancient conflicts all hint at the Balrog's capacity to alter events indirectly. Gandalf's wisdom emerges from his careful study of these traces, his ability to read between the lines of myth and memory. Unlike Sauron, whose patterns can be anticipated through surveillance and intelligence, the Balrog's influence must be inferred, its effects observed, and its timing understood through patient reflection. The cost of miscalculation is subtle but profound. Not only the loss of life or treasure, but the distortion of the threads that connect people, places, and fate. By the end of this chapter, we begin to grasp why Gandalf's fear is particular, why it surpasses the dread inspired by Sauron. It is a fear tempered by knowledge, informed by insight, and shaped by an awareness of the delicate balance of forces in Middle-earth. The Balrog is not merely a creature of flame and shadow. It is an enduring echo of the primordial discord that shaped the very world, a living testament to the dangers of ancient power unbound by ambition or law. Gandalf's approach is measured, reflective, and patient, aware that intervention without comprehension may carry consequences greater than inaction. As we transition to the next chapter, we will place the Balrog within the larger hierarchy of the First Age, examining Morgoth's legacy and the ways in which these forces of entropy and ruin shaped histories, territories, and the moral landscapes Gandalf must navigate. It is within this framework that we begin to see the contrast between structured tyranny and unstructured terror, a distinction that illuminates the very heart of Gandalf's fear. The threads of memory, consequence, and vigilance weave together to form the backdrop for a story not of simple confrontation, but of insight, patience, and the enduring challenge of confronting forces older than the mountains themselves. As we move forward from the origins of the Balrogs, we arrive at the shadowed heart of Morgoth's dominion, Angband, where history and memory converge into patterns of fear and influence. Here, in the cold, iron-bound halls, Gandalf's understanding of power deepens. Angband was more than a fortress. It was the axis of a cosmic imbalance, a place where ambition met entropy, and where the remnants of the first Dark Lord's will lingered long after the battles of the First Age. It is within this context that the distinction between structured tyranny, embodied by Sauron, and unstructured terror, embodied by the Balrog, becomes apparent. Gandalf's dread is not a product of imagination alone. It is the logical conclusion of observing how unbound forces shape events with a patience and inevitability that no strategy can fully contain. Angband's architecture itself tells a story. Its spiked gates and unyielding halls were constructed to project order, to control, and to intimidate. Yet within this apparent discipline flowed currents of chaos. Balrogs, as agents of Morgoth's will, moved through these halls with an autonomy that transcended command. Unlike Sauron, whose dominion relies on hierarchy, minions, and structured intimidation, the Balrog's influence was immediate and pervasive, bending the very environment and the minds of those who entered its domain. Gandalf, in his contemplative journeys across Middle-earth, recognized this distinction early. Power that follows rules may be resisted. Power that defies them cannot be predicted with certainty, and therein lies its terror. To comprehend why Gandalf feared the Balrog, one must examine the nature of Angband itself, a nexus of lingering entropy. The fortress was not merely a seat of rule, it was a container of ancient fire, a repository of the discord that had once threatened the Valar themselves. When the First Age drew to a close, and Morgoth was expelled beyond the confines of the world, many assumed that such dangers were sealed and forgotten. Yet Balrogs remained, undiminished in their essence, though their numbers had waned. Their presence in the deep places of Middle-earth served as a reminder that even the most complete victories could not entirely eliminate the legacy of primordial chaos. Gandalf's apprehension reflects an understanding of this principle. Some threats are measured not in armies or artifacts, but in endurance, subtlety, and the capacity to shape events indirectly. Consider the casualties of Moria, the dwarves who dug deep for Mithril, whose ambition intersected unknowingly with the residual presence of the Balrog. Their fall was not the result of direct confrontation with a schemer like Sauron, but the unavoidable consequence of awakening a force older than any king or crown. Gandalf's fear is therefore calibrated. It is a recognition of the cost of engagement with unstructured power, a cost that encompasses more than life alone. History bears this truth quietly, through the ruins of Angband, through the scattered records of the First Age, and through the patterns Gandalf studies with meticulous care. In this sense, the Balrog is both a relic and an active participant, a presence that reshapes events simply by existing in the spaces it inhabits. The mechanisms of influence at work within Angband are subtle yet profound. While Sauron's power manifests through domination, coercion, and strategic manipulation, the Balrog's power flows organically, a natural extension of being. Fire and shadow are not mere weapons, but expressions of essence. Every movement, every gesture carries the weight of eons. Gandalf understands that to confront such a being without respect and calculation is to invite ruin. Knowledge, patience, and timing are essential. Courage alone is insufficient. Here, Gandalf's role as Istari is clarified. He is not meant to defeat the Balrog through force, but to navigate its presence, guide others through its shadows, and intervene with precise judgment when the balance of necessity and opportunity aligns. Yet Gandalf's understanding does not render him immune to fear. Rather, it refines it, transforms it into a tool for measured action. The Balrog represents a challenge that Sauron, for all his might, does not pose: the need to reckon with unpredictability on a cosmic scale. Gandalf perceives the stakes not only in terms of immediate survival, but also in the preservation of history, culture, and the delicate threads of fate that connect Middle-earth's peoples. In this light, fear is an instrument of foresight, a calibration of action against consequence, and a reminder of the limits inherent even to beings as wise and capable as the Istari. Breadcrumbs of this enduring influence appear throughout Gandalf's journeys. The echoes of Angband can be traced in the lingering instability of the misty mountains, in the faint memory of ancient fires in the deep places, and in the stories whispered among dwarves and elves alike. Gandalf reads these patterns, noting how power persists and mutates over time, how entropy and structured dominion create different kinds of dread, and how the lessons of the First Age must inform action in the Third. By observing without overreacting, Gandalf maintains both clarity and humility, understanding that some legacies cannot be eradicated, but only navigated with care. As we conclude this chapter, we can see why Gandalf's fear of the Balrog is particular, why it surpasses the apprehension inspired by even the most formidable Dark Lord. The Balrog's power is not merely destructive, it is ancient, autonomous, and entwined with the very structure of Middle-earth. Its influence persists even in absence, through memory, ruin, and the subtle reshaping of fate. Gandalf's role is therefore to observe, to measure, and to act only when circumstances demand, guided by insight, patience, and an awareness of limits. In the next chapter, we will focus more closely on Gandalf himself. The mandate, duties and constraints that define the Astari, and how these factors shape his approach to forces like the Balrog. By understanding Gandalf's role, we can appreciate how fear is not weakness, but a reflective tool, one that guides wisdom, preserves life, and maintains the fragile balance of Middle-earth. It is here that the personal and the cosmic intersect, revealing why one particular shadow can command more cautious respect than even the most ambitious tyrant. We now turn inward from the vast shadowed halls of Angband and the echoes of primordial fire to Gandalf himself and the unique mandate that shapes his actions across Middle-earth. The Astari, emissaries of the Valar, were not sent to conquer, to dominate, or to enforce law. Their task is subtler, to guide, to counsel, and to preserve the balance between free peoples and the encroaching shadows that threaten the world's order. Gandalf's fear of the Balrog, when viewed through this lens, is not simply a matter of personal safety, but of responsibility, duty, and foresight. He must navigate not only the physical risks of confrontation, but the ethical, cosmic, and strategic implications of engagement with an entity older than kingdoms or empires. The nature of the Astari's mandate clarifies why Gandalf's perspective differs from that of mortal rulers or even other powerful beings in Middle-earth. The Valar constrained the Astari deliberately. They were limited in power, prohibited from dominating minds or bending wills through force alone. Their influence must operate through counsel, encouragement, and subtle intervention. Gandalf's dread of the Balrog is therefore shaped not by cowardice, but by awareness of these limitations. He cannot simply eradicate the creature. He must anticipate, observe, and act with precision, intervening only when the stakes demand and the consequences can be managed. In this way, fear functions as a measure of prudence, a calibration of his own abilities against the scale and unpredictability of an ancient, unstructured threat. It is within this framework that we begin to understand the Balrog's particular terror. Unlike Sauron, whose ambition and power can be tracked, studied, and countered through intelligence, diplomacy, and direct action, the Balrog operates outside conventional structures. Its motives are not strategic in a political sense, nor does it seek dominion. It is driven by essence, a lingering reflection of Morgoth's chaos and the primordial discord of Arda itself. Gandalf's apprehension reflects recognition of this difference. The Balrog's power is independent, ancient, and deeply embedded in the physical and metaphysical layers of the world. Any engagement is therefore a negotiation not merely of skill or strategy, but of understanding, timing, and moral discernment. Gandalf's role requires balancing knowledge with action. His mandate is both protective and advisory, ensuring that free peoples are guided without being dominated, that history flows according to its natural currents, and that the forces of entropy do not overwhelm the structure of life itself. In confronting or navigating the presence of a Balrog, he must weigh countless variables: the safety of companions, the potential disruption to civilizations, the long-term effects on Middle-earth's unfolding destiny. Fear, in this context, is not paralysis, but a precise instrument of awareness, guiding Gandalf to intervene neither prematurely nor too late, always within the constraints imposed by his divine mandate. The constraints of the Astari also illuminate the psychological dimensions of Gandalf's fear. He carries the burden of foresight, knowledge of patterns, history, and consequence that others cannot perceive. The Balrog, as an unstructured and autonomous agent of ancient chaos, presents a test of both moral and strategic judgment. Gandalf's approach is deliberate, patient, and reflective, recognizing that rash action may carry costs far greater than inaction. Unlike confrontations with Sauron, where domination and power can be countered with alliances, tactics, and artifacts such as the One Ring, the Balrog's presence must be understood in terms of essence and legacy. Its danger is not solely physical, but existential. It is a force that can alter fate, warp perception, and disrupt history if engaged without respect and insight. Historical breadcrumbs reinforce this approach. The dwarves' ill-fated excavation of Moria, the lingering presence of Balrogs from the First Age, and the subtle disturbances in shadow and fire throughout Middle-earth all point to a principle Gandalf internalizes early. Power unbound by structure demands a careful, measured response. Gandalf's fear is therefore proactive rather than reactive. It compels vigilance, careful planning, and patience. In this sense, dread is an instrument of wisdom, a recognition of the delicate balance between intervention and observation, action and restraint, courage and prudence. The interplay between mandate and fear is particularly significant when considering Gandalf's interactions with other free peoples. His guidance is never coercive. It is subtle, indirect, and strategic. Even when confronting Sauron's minions or directing armies against threats, Gandalf's approach is mediated by knowledge, foresight, and a recognition of limits. The Balrog challenges this methodology uniquely. Its ancient, unstructured nature does not respond predictably to counsel, manipulation, or strategic planning. Gandalf's apprehension, therefore, is a reflection of situational awareness on a cosmic scale. He perceives the potential for ruin inherent in misjudgment, not only for himself but for the interconnected web of lives, histories, and destinies he is charged to protect. As we conclude this chapter, we see that Gandalf's fear is inseparable from his mandate. It is not a weakness, but a measure of responsibility, a careful calibration of insight, morality, and foresight against the unpredictable, ancient, and enduring force that is the Balrog. It prepares him, mentally and spiritually, for the trials that lie ahead, guiding his actions with measured caution and reflective judgment. Gandalf's role as Istari is thus illuminated. He exists to observe, guide, and intervene when necessary, always within the delicate balance between freedom, duty, and the subtle currents of fate. In the next chapter, we will explore the Balrog itself more intimately, examining its nature, abilities, and methods, and how these qualities combine to make it uniquely terrifying in Gandalf's eyes. By understanding the creature as both a relic of the First Age and an active, autonomous presence in Middle-earth, we will see why Gandalf's fear is measured, reflective, and profound, rooted not only in immediate danger, but in the enduring consequences of engaging with an ancient, unstructured force. From Gandalf's mandate and the weight of his responsibilities, we now turn our focus to the Balrog itself, examining the creature's nature, abilities, and the qualities that make it so uniquely terrifying. To understand why Gandalf regards the Balrog with such cautious dread, it is necessary to see it not simply as a beast of fire and shadow, but as a being whose essence is bound to the very structure of Middle-earth and the residual chaos of the First Age. Unlike Sauron, whose dominion depends on ambition, cunning, and hierarchical manipulation, the Balrog's power is innate, unstructured, and persistent. It is a living echo of primordial entropy, a force that cannot be bargained with, reasoned with, or entirely predicted. Its presence alone reshapes its surroundings, bending shadow, fire, and perception to its being. The Balrog is in many ways both elemental and sentient. Its shadow is not mere absence of light, but an active distortion of perception, extending influence beyond the reach of physical form. Flames trail its movements, yet fire is more than a weapon. It is a manifestation of essence, a reflection of power that predates the kingdoms of men, elves, or dwarves. Even its steps seem to resonate across stone and air, leaving impressions that endure long after it has passed. Gandalf, with his keen perception and study of ancient texts, understands that the Balrog's threat is not measured in raw strength alone, but in subtle, pervasive influence. It alters outcomes by presence, perception, and persistent pressure on both environment and will. The mechanisms through which a Balrog operates are subtle, yet profound. It can inspire terror, not through malice or cunning alone, but through its very being. Shadows gather in anticipation, and even the bravest of warriors feel hesitation and doubt. Its fire and shadow extend beyond immediate combat, shaping the environment in ways that complicate any engagement. Mountains, halls, and caverns all respond to its presence, as though the land itself remembers the fires of the First Age. Gandalf's understanding of these mechanisms informs his dread. The Balrog cannot be contained through conventional means, and its influence spreads not only across space, but through time, affecting decisions and shaping the legacy of those who confront it. Yet the Balrog's threat is not purely metaphysical. Its corporeal form is immense, with limbs and wings that extend like darkened architecture, moving with both deliberation and sudden, unpredictable bursts. Its movements combine the precision of intelligence with the raw force of primordial energy. Gandalf recognizes that any direct confrontation will demand both strategic acumen and profound courage. Yet it is the combination of intellect, instinct, and elemental power that makes the creature uniquely formidable. Unlike Sauron, who can be studied, observed, and countered through planning and alliances, the Balrog challenges the observer to anticipate instinctual and ancient patterns that are not fully knowable. Gandalf also understands the moral and existential cost of encountering such a being. Its influence can warp perception, disrupt courage, and leave lasting effects on both mind and body. Those who have brushed against its presence in history, dwarves, elves, and even men who ventured too close to remnants of its power, bear evidence of lingering dread, confusion, or obsession. This is not a predictable consequence of conventional violence, but a reflection of the Balrog's nature as an agent of entropy. Engagement carries risks that extend far beyond immediate survival. Gandalf's fear, therefore, is informed, deliberate, and deeply practical. It is a recognition that some threats cannot be met with brute force alone. They demand wisdom, patience, and timing. Breadcrumbs of this understanding appear throughout Middle-earth. Moria's ancient halls, carved deep by the dwarves, bear the scars of the Balrog's presence, collapsed ceilings, lingering heat, and the echo of steps that no living being could have left. Gandalf reads these traces, interpreting the subtle signs that indicate not only presence, but intention, pattern, and the consequences of disturbance. By doing so, he prepares both mentally and spiritually for the confrontation that may be unavoidable, shaping strategies that consider the ripple effects across history, territory, and morality. It is also important to note the temporal endurance of the Balrog. Unlike mortals or even other Maiar, it does not age in conventional terms. Its essence persists across centuries, retaining the memory of battles, the residue of fire, and the knowledge of environments long forgotten by most of the world. This longevity adds another layer to Gandalf's apprehension. He confronts not only physical danger, but the accumulated wisdom and instinct of a being whose experience spans millennia. Its power is constant, its patience immense, and its unpredictability a continuous reminder of forces that exist outside the domain of mortal calculation or the structured schemes of other dark powers. By the end of this chapter, we perceive why Gandalf's fear is measured and profound. The Balrog is more than an adversary. It is a living relic of the First Age, a force that embodies entropy, persistence, and the subtle shaping of fate. Its shadow, its fire, and its presence are instruments of influence as much as its strength and combat ability. Gandalf's approach reflects his awareness of these qualities, balancing courage with prudence, strategy with patience, and insight with vigilance. Fear here is a tool, not a weakness, a compass guiding him through the uncertainties of the deep places, ensuring that when action becomes necessary, it is precise, purposeful, and reflective. In the next chapter, we will move from the external qualities of the Balrog to the internal landscape of Gandalf's mind. We will explore how his foresight, intuition, and moral reasoning shape his approach to confronting such a being, and how the combination of cosmic understanding and personal responsibility informs the unique dread that governs his interactions with forces older than Middle-earth itself. Having explored the essence and mechanisms of the Balrog, we now turn inward to Gandalf's own mind, where fear and foresight intertwine to shape his understanding and response. Gandalf is not merely a witness to ancient forces. He is an interpreter, a guide, and a mediator. His dread of the Balrog is neither instinctive nor reckless. It is measured, reflective, and deeply informed by both history and personal insight. Fear, in his case, functions as a compass, a tool that sharpens judgment and prioritizes action while preserving awareness of his limitations. It is through this lens that Gandalf approaches the looming threat, understanding not only what the Balrog can do, but what it signifies within the broader currents of Middle-earth. Foresight, as Gandalf practices it, is both an art and a discipline. It is an integration of memory, observation, and subtle inference. Gandalf perceives patterns in history, notes the echoes of ancient battles, and interprets the lingering impressions of forces long dormant. These patterns, often invisible to others, form a lattice through which he can anticipate potential outcomes. Yet the Balrog challenges this practice in a way that Sauron never could. The Dark Lord's ambition, though vast and dangerous, is bounded by structure. Hierarchy, strategy, and desire are legible to those who study them carefully. The Balrog, by contrast, is autonomous, instinctive, and ancient, operating according to patterns that are organic rather than strategic, unpredictable, yet consistent in their subtle influence. Gandalf's foresight must therefore be flexible, patient, and deeply attuned to nuance. This cognitive discipline is informed by moral as well as practical considerations. Gandalf understands that fear is not merely a response to danger, but a reflection of responsibility. His role as Istari is not to dominate or impose, but to counsel, guide, and intervene judiciously. The presence of the Balrog tests this mandate, challenging Gandalf to balance prudence with courage, observation with timely action. He weighs each decision carefully. Advancing too soon might provoke a force beyond control, while delaying risks allowing its influence to spread unchecked. In this way, fear becomes a form of strategic insight, a recognition of consequence that preserves life, history, and the delicate balance of the world. The mechanisms of foresight operate through both observation and reflection. Gandalf studies the echoes of the Balrog's passage, the distortions of shadow, the residual heat in stone, and the subtle unease that lingers where it has moved. He considers historical records, the dwarves of Moria, who dug too deeply, the ruins of Angband, and the lingering tremors of the First Age. Each fragment of evidence contributes to a mosaic of understanding, revealing patterns that are never complete but always informative. The Balrog's power is relational. It exists not in isolation, but in interaction with the world, shaping perception, altering decisions, and influencing outcomes in ways that are often imperceptible until the moment of direct engagement. Gandalf's foresight is therefore both analytical and contemplative, integrating observation, intuition, and moral judgment into a coherent approach to a threat that defies conventional measurement. The psychological dimension of fear also bears careful consideration. Gandalf recognizes that unstructured power has a different effect than structured ambition. Sauron's threat can be studied, predicted, and mitigated through alliances, intelligence, and strategy. The Balrog, by contrast, inspires hesitation, caution, and even awe, not through calculation, but through presence. Gandalf's awareness of this influence allows him to act deliberately, shaping his own behavior and the behavior of others in ways that minimize risk while maximizing understanding. Fear becomes not a constraint, but a guide, a way to navigate uncertainty without succumbing to it, and to measure action against consequence with both clarity and humility. Breadcrumbs of these practices appear subtly throughout Gandalf's journeys. His counsel to companions, his strategic patience in crises, and his deep reflection before decisive action all reflect an internalized discipline, shaped by observation, moral reasoning, and the anticipation of complex forces. The lessons of the past, the remnants of ancient power, and the persistence of entropy all inform his approach, creating a framework in which fear is neither paralyzing nor uncontrolled, but calibrated, insightful, and productive. It is through this discipline that Gandalf's dread of the Balrog gains meaning. It is a recognition of what is at stake and a careful accounting of what must be preserved. In practical terms, this foresight manifests as preparation and restraint. Gandalf does not rush toward confrontation. He studies terrain, considers potential allies and vulnerabilities, and evaluates the consequences of both action and inaction. Every movement, every choice is informed by a deep understanding of both immediate risk and long-term effect. In this way, fear becomes an instrument of wisdom, guiding behavior without dictating it, informing judgment without constraining moral or strategic flexibility. Gandalf's awareness of the Balrog's potential for disruption ensures that he engages not impulsively, but with precise deliberation, balancing courage with caution in a manner that few other beings in Middle-earth could manage. As this chapter draws to a close, we can see that Gandalf's fear is inseparable from his foresight. It is not a weakness, nor a simple emotional reaction. It is a carefully cultivated lens through which he perceives risk, consequence, and the subtleties of unstructured power. The Balrog, in all its ancient and autonomous force, represents a challenge that tests both skill and moral insight, demanding reflection, patience, and precise judgment. Gandalf's ability to integrate fear with foresight allows him to navigate this challenge with wisdom, balancing duty with prudence, courage with observation, and action with restraint. In the next chapter, we will contrast Gandalf's careful anticipation with the predictable structures of Sauron's tyranny. By comparing the mechanisms and limitations of both forces, we will begin to understand why unstructured, primordial power can inspire a fear deeper and more enduring than even that commanded by a dark lord who seeks dominion across the world. This contrast will clarify the unique place of the Balrog in Gandalf's hierarchy of dread, and set the stage for the events that follow in Middle-earth's deep places. Having examined the Balrog's essence and Gandalf's internalized foresight, we now turn to a comparative reflection. Why does Gandalf fear the Balrog more than Sauron, whose dominion over Middle-earth is vast and relentless? To understand this, we must consider the difference between structured tyranny and primordial terror, and how each operates within the moral, strategic, and temporal frameworks of the world. Sauron's power, though formidable, is organized, comprehensible, and constrained by his own ambitions and needs. The Balrog, by contrast, is autonomous, ancient, and fundamentally inscrutable, operating according to instincts and principles that predate kingdoms, empires, and even conscious strategy. Sauron's dominion depends upon hierarchy, coercion, and the careful orchestration of events. His strategies are deliberate, his minions follow orders, and his ambitions can be anticipated through observation of patterns and vulnerabilities. Gandalf, trained to discern these patterns, recognizes both the strengths and the limits of Sauron's influence. Through intelligence, diplomacy, and alliances, Sauron's power can be mitigated, resisted, or delayed. His objectives, while grand, are legible. They can be read, understood, and responded to. Gandalf's role is to guide, advise, and occasionally intervene, but the relative predictability of Sauron's schemes allows for measured action, a buffer that even a vigilant emissary can navigate without succumbing to paralyzing dread. The Balrog, in contrast, presents a fundamentally different challenge. It does not operate according to ambition, politics, or structured tyranny. Its influence is diffuse, pervasive, and instinctual, anchored in essence rather than calculation. Where Sauron can be studied, countered, and anticipated, the Balrog's movements and effects ripple outward unpredictably. It is not the intent of the creature that concerns Gandalf, but the inevitability of its impact, the capacity of its presence to reshape environment, perception, and decision-making in ways that cannot be entirely controlled. This difference is subtle, yet profound. Structured tyranny invites preparation and response. Primordial terror requires patience, reflection, and a constant awareness of limits. Gandalf's fear is calibrated precisely to this distinction. Consider the spatial influence of each. Sauron exerts power across realms through networks of agents, artifacts, and dominion. His shadow spreads, but it is bound by geography, hierarchy, and the capacities of his servants. Gandalf can anticipate the consequences of Sauron's moves, interpret the warning signs, and act with knowledge of causality. The Balrog, by contrast, exerts influence in a localized, but profoundly deep way. Its presence warps stone, shadow, and mind alike. Moria is not merely a site of combat or history. It is a locus of residual entropy, shaped by a being whose instincts and essence are older than the mountains themselves. Gandalf's fear is therefore rooted in understanding. Sauron's threat can be confronted. The Balrog's presence must be respected, navigated, and endured with careful judgment. The temporal dimension also contributes to Gandalf's perception. Sauron's schemes, while long-ranging, are constrained by personal ambition, desire, and the needs of empire. The Balrog, by contrast, embodies endurance. Its essence persists through centuries, retaining memory, instinct, and influence that outlasts empires, reigns, and mortal comprehension. Gandalf, who observes history with both clarity and empathy, recognizes that this endurance carries subtle costs. It imposes a continuous pressure on those who inhabit its sphere, creating consequences that accumulate quietly, persistently, and often invisibly. Fear, in this context, becomes not only a reflection of immediate danger, but a tool for gauging long-term consequence, a way to align action with insight over time. Gandalf's insight into these dynamics is revealed through observation and reflection. He notes patterns in the movements of Sauron's minions, traces the echoes of Balrog influence across Moria, and synthesizes these strands into a framework of understanding. Structured tyranny, though potent, is legible. It can be responded to systematically. Primordial terror, however, is non-linear, diffuse, and instinctual, demanding a form of vigilance that is both reflective and adaptive. Gandalf's fear is therefore a product of both wisdom and necessity. It guides his preparation, informs his restraint, and ensures that engagement occurs only when circumstances are favorable, when insight aligns with action, and when the cost of intervention is understood as fully as possible. Breadcrumbs of these dynamics appear in subtle ways throughout Middle-earth. The ruins of the First Age, the deep echoes of Moria, and the recorded histories of elves, men, and dwarves all illustrate the persistent influence of primordial forces. Gandalf studies these traces, interpreting them as lessons in the limitations of strategy, the endurance of essence, and the necessity of patience. By contrast, Sauron's threat, though immediate and vast, is mediated through predictable hierarchies, offering a framework for counteraction that the Astari can navigate without surrendering to panic or dread. Ultimately, the contrast between structured tyranny and primordial terror clarifies the hierarchy of Gandalf's apprehension. Sauron embodies ambition, strategy, and control, all of which are dangerous but predictable. The Balrog embodies endurance, instinct, and disruption, forces that exist outside the framework of conventional comprehension. Gandalf's fear is not fear of defeat alone. It is the recognition of what cannot be fully known or controlled, and the understanding that engagement with such forces carries consequences that extend far beyond immediate survival. In this way, his caution is both practical and reflective, informed by insight, history, and moral responsibility. As this chapter closes, we are left with a deeper understanding of why Gandalf's fear surpasses even his wariness of Sauron. It is a fear tempered by wisdom, structured by foresight, and directed by the obligations of his mandate. In the next chapter, we will examine the specific events in Moria that crystallized this dread, exploring the encounter itself and the preparation, reflection, and decision-making that brought Gandalf face to face with the shadow of primordial terror. By observing these moments, we gain insight into both the creature and the vigilant mind that must navigate it, deepening our understanding of fear, foresight, and the delicate balance of power in Middle-earth. Having explored the theoretical distinctions between structured tyranny and primordial terror, we now descend into the deep places of Middle-earth, where theory meets tangible reality. Moria, the ancient dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm, stands as both a monument and a warning. Its vast halls, carved from stone and shadow, are not merely ruins, but archives of history, memory, and latent danger. Gandalf's fear of the Balrog becomes tangible here, grounded in observation, evidence, and the echoing consequences of those who came before. The dwarves, ambitious and meticulous, unearthed mithril and treasures deep within the mountains, unaware that their excavation intersected with forces older than their civilization. Moria thus becomes the stage upon which the nature of primordial terror and its effect on the vigilant mind are most clearly revealed. The mechanisms of Moria's danger are subtle yet relentless. Stone, shadow, and echo converge to form a space that magnifies the Balrog's presence. It is not merely a creature to be confronted, but an essence that permeates the environment, bending perception, manipulating space, and reminding those who enter that power rooted in primordial chaos does not conform to expectation. Gandalf, attuned to these subtle cues, reads every tremor, every unnatural shadow, every lingering heat as part of a larger pattern, a signal of enduring presence and persistent influence. His approach is measured, informed by foresight and restraint, and guided by the understanding that the cost of miscalculation extends beyond immediate danger into history, legacy, and the preservation of life. The echoes of the Balrog manifest in both physical and psychological terms. Halls once vibrant with dwarven song now lie silent, punctuated by the occasional collapse of stone or the whisper of lingering fire. Even the air seems heavy, carrying the residue of energy that predates kingdoms and ages. Gandalf perceives not only the present danger, but the accumulated consequences of centuries, noting how instinct and elemental force have carved patterns into the architecture itself. Here, the difference between confronting Sauron and confronting a Balrog becomes starkly apparent. Sauron's influence operates through agents, plans, and observable motives, whereas the Balrog's influence is immediate, pervasive, and persistent, responding less to strategy than to the natural laws of its essence. The psychological dimension of these echoes is profound. The dwarves, in their ambition, underestimated not only the Balrog, but the subtler influence of the deep places. Curiosity and courage met forces beyond comprehension, and the consequences were catastrophic. Gandalf, observing these patterns, understands that fear in such contexts is not merely emotional, but instructive. It signals limits, highlights risks, and informs action. It is calibrated by knowledge, refined through reflection, and tempered by moral responsibility. To confront a being so intertwined with the very fabric of the world requires more than strength. It demands insight, patience, and a keen awareness of both consequence and environment. Breadcrumbs of this dynamic appear in the smallest details: the worn edges of stone, the heat lingering in walls long after fires have died, the silence of corridors that once rang with industry. All these are traces, subtle yet profound, of the Balrog's persistent influence. Gandalf interprets these signs, understanding that they are not isolated anomalies, but components of a pattern that spans both time and space. The Balrog's presence is both historical and immediate, a continuous thread that connects the past of Moria with the present and future of those who must navigate its halls. In this way, the echoes themselves become lessons, a guide to both action and restraint. Preparation in Moria is therefore a combination of observation, reflection, and calibrated intervention. Gandalf moves with deliberate caution, interpreting shadows, anticipating effects, and adjusting behavior in real time. His fear is neither impulsive nor paralyzing. It is precise, guiding him to act in ways that preserve both life and the continuity of history. Where Sauron can be engaged through direct strategy, the Balrog demands a nuanced, responsive, and adaptive approach. Every movement is measured, every observation noted, and every potential consequence considered. In this careful navigation, Gandalf exemplifies the balance between courage and prudence, foresight and respect for limits. The moral stakes of Moria are as significant as the physical ones. The dwarves' ambition collided with a force whose essence cannot be subdued through conventional means. Gandalf's understanding of this collision informs his decisions, shaping how he engages, protects, and advises others. The Balrog, as an agent of primordial chaos, imposes consequences that extend beyond immediate survival into the preservation of history, culture, and the delicate webs that connect lives, decisions, and legacy. Fear, in this context, functions as an instrument of moral and strategic clarity, a guide to aligning action with both knowledge and principle. By the end of this chapter, the echoes of Moria illustrate clearly why Gandalf's apprehension of the Balrog is profound and enduring. The presence of a force older than empires, independent of ambition, and embedded within the very structure of the world, demands vigilance, foresight, and respect. Gandalf's role as guide and protector is illuminated through the careful calibration of fear and action, showing how courage alone is insufficient when confronting a being whose influence spans both history and environment. In the next chapter, we will follow Gandalf's methodical approach as he prepares for confrontation, examining the mental, spiritual, and strategic frameworks that guide his decisions. By observing his careful preparation, we gain insight into how wisdom, fear, and foresight converge to navigate forces older and more unpredictable than any mortal or structured tyrant. This will lay the groundwork for understanding the critical moments that define Gandalf's encounter with the Balrog, where preparation, insight, and moral clarity meet the raw, unstructured power of primordial terror. Building upon the echoes of Moria, we now turn to Gandalf's preparation, the careful, deliberate approach that reflects both foresight and the weight of responsibility. In the deep, shadowed corridors of Khazad-dûm, preparation is not simply physical, but mental, spiritual, and strategic. Gandalf moves with intention, aware that the Balrog's presence is not a conventional threat. Its essence is ancient, autonomous, and entwined with the very structure of the mountain. To confront such a being without consideration of both immediate and long-term consequences would be catastrophic. Fear, in this sense, is not paralysis, but guidance, a subtle instrument to calibrate action with wisdom and principle. Preparation begins with observation. Gandalf reads the patterns of the deep places, the way shadows fall, the residual heat in stone, the subtle tremors that hint at latent energy. Each detail provides insight into the Balrog's presence and influence, informing choices before confrontation becomes unavoidable. Gandalf's years of study and experience allow him to interpret these signs, translating subtle environmental cues into a coherent map of potential risk. Every movement, every pause, and every gesture is informed by the understanding that the Balrog shapes reality simply by existing, and that misjudgment may carry consequences far beyond personal danger. Mental discipline is equally essential. Gandalf cultivates a steady mind, balancing fear with clarity, intuition with reflection. He anticipates the effects of the Balrog's presence on both himself and companions, acknowledging that unstructured power can warp perception, undermine courage, and influence decision-making in ways subtle yet profound. Fear, carefully observed and managed, becomes a compass. It directs attention to risk, guides ethical choices, and ensures that action occurs at the most opportune moment. This internal preparation mirrors the physical awareness of the mountain, creating a holistic readiness that integrates body, mind, and spirit. Spiritual alignment also plays a role. As an emissary of the Valar, Gandalf draws upon his understanding of purpose, duty, and the limits of intervention. His mandate does not allow domination or coercion. It demands guidance and measured influence. This principle shapes every decision: when to advance, when to retreat, and how to maintain balance between observation and action. The Balrog tests not only courage and skill, but also moral clarity, revealing the consequences of misaligned action. Gandalf's preparation ensures that his decisions are not reactive but deliberate, informed by insight and constrained by principle, harmonizing the practical with the ethical. Strategic planning is the final component. Gandalf considers the terrain, the potential for allies or witnesses, and the ways in which his actions might ripple through history. Unlike Sauron, whose schemes can be anticipated through intelligence, or armies that can be influenced through alliances and tactics, the Balrog's influence operates according to instinct and essence. Gandalf must account for factors beyond immediate control: the persistence of the creature's presence, the unpredictability of its movements, and the subtle ways in which it can reshape both space and perception. Preparation, therefore, is anticipatory and adaptive, integrating careful observation with ethical reflection and strategic foresight. Breadcrumbs of this preparation appear in Gandalf's interactions with the Fellowship and with others who traverse Middle-earth. Subtle guidance, timing of intervention, and the management of risk all reflect the lessons learned from observing the Balrog's nature and history. Gandalf cultivates awareness not only of the external threat, but of the internal landscape of those around him, recognizing that fear is contagious and perception is malleable. His preparation ensures that others are guided safely, that history is preserved, and that the inevitable encounter occurs under conditions that maximize both understanding and survival. The interplay between fear and foresight reaches its full expression in these moments of preparation. Gandalf does not suppress fear. he observes it, calibrates it, and allows it to inform judgment. He understands that the Balrog's power is not merely a function of size, strength, or fire, but of enduring, autonomous influence, and that engagement without preparation would risk not only lives, but the very balance of Middle-earth. This integrated approach, combining observation, mental discipline, spiritual clarity, and strategic awareness, forms a template for navigating forces that are older, less predictable, and fundamentally unstructured. History itself reinforces the value of such preparation. The dwarves of Moria, in their ambition and curiosity, failed to anticipate the consequences of awakening the Balrog. Their civilization, their knowledge, and their lives were devastated by engagement without understanding. Gandalf, aware of these patterns, internalizes the lessons. Fear must be observed, insight must be sought, and action must be measured. In doing so, he transforms apprehension into preparedness, anxiety into strategic clarity, and caution into a guide for ethical and effective intervention. As this chapter concludes, we see that Gandalf's preparation is more than tactical readiness. It is a harmonization of body, mind, and spirit, a calibration of fear with foresight, and a reflection of the responsibilities imposed by his mandate. The Balrog, as an agent of primordial terror, demands nothing less. Every step, every pause, every decision carries consequence, and Gandalf's careful alignment ensures that these consequences are navigated with wisdom, courage, and principle. In the next chapter, we will trace the final approach through the deepest halls of Moria, observing the tension, reflection, and subtle navigation that precedes the inevitable confrontation. By following Gandalf's measured path, we gain insight into how preparation, insight, and moral clarity converge when facing a force whose power is unbound, autonomous, and ancient. This will set the stage for the first tangible encounter, where dread and responsibility meet the living embodiment of primordial terror. Building on the careful preparation Gandalf undertook in the shadowed halls of Moria, we now follow him as he descends deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, where history, danger, and the lingering essence of the Balrog converge. The journey is measured, deliberate, and suffused with awareness, reflecting the integration of fear, foresight, and moral responsibility. Moria is not merely a physical space to traverse. It is a temporal and psychological landscape shaped by centuries of dwarven ambition, fire, and shadow. Each step carries the weight of legacy, each pause allows observation, and each echo in the halls reminds Gandalf that the presence he approaches is both ancient and persistent. The descent emphasizes the relational nature of the Balrog's influence. Its power is not confined to immediate confrontation, but manifests subtly across space and perception. Shadows deepen, stone retains heat, and faint tremors hint at activity beyond sight. Gandalf interprets these signs with precision, noting patterns in how the Balrog interacts with its environment, how its presence bends the world subtly, and how instinct shapes its movements. In this way, every element of the journey functions as a guide, a teacher, and a cautionary signal. Gandalf's fear informs his attention, and his attention structures both his path and his choices. The mechanism of anticipation operates through observation, intuition, and reflection. Gandalf notices the smallest anomalies, shifts in air, faint warmth along the walls, and the echoing patterns of distant stone falls. These are not mere curiosities, but breadcrumbs, indicators of a force that interacts with the world according to principles that are instinctual and elemental rather than strategic or political. By reading these subtle cues, Gandalf positions himself to act effectively when engagement becomes unavoidable. Fear, once again, functions as a guide, shaping perception and informing judgment without overwhelming action. Spatial awareness is critical. The architecture of Moria amplifies both sound and shadow, creating corridors where presence itself can be felt long before it is seen. Gandalf moves carefully, calibrating each step to the environment, using knowledge of acoustics, light, and material to anticipate potential effects. His understanding of the Balrog as both being and influence allows him to navigate these halls with deliberate caution. Preparation extends into movement, making every step purposeful, and every pause an opportunity for reflection and observation. The mountain itself becomes a collaborator, providing subtle signals and constraints that guide Gandalf toward informed engagement. The psychological dimension of descent cannot be understated. Gandalf recognizes that the Balrog's influence operates not only on the physical world, but on perception and morale. Shadows gather in ways that induce hesitation, and the lingering echoes of fire and entropy test both patience and courage. He modulates his own fear, transforming it into focused attention, using dread as a lens through which to interpret signs and predict outcomes. The descent becomes an exercise in disciplined awareness, balancing vigilance with calm and preserving both ethical clarity and strategic potential. Historical resonance amplifies the depth of this journey. The echoes of dwarven ambition, of caverns carved too deeply and fires long extinguished, create a temporal layering that informs Gandalf's actions. Every corridor bears traces of ambition and consequence, reminders that engagement with forces older than kingdoms carries cost. Gandalf's awareness of this historical substrate shapes his decisions, reinforcing the need for measured action, careful observation, and respect for limits. Preparation, in this context, becomes a continuous process of reading history in the landscape, integrating insight into movement, and aligning behavior with both ethical principle and practical survival. Spiritual grounding is equally essential. Gandalf draws on his mandate and sense of duty to temper both fear and action. His presence in Moria is not an assertion of dominance, but an exercise in stewardship, a careful calibration of influence and restraint. He acknowledges the Balrog's autonomy, recognizing that engagement carries not only immediate risk, but ethical and temporal consequence. Fear, observed and integrated, serves as a mechanism for maintaining alignment with purpose, ensuring that every decision honors both responsibility and foresight. Breadcrumbs for the coming confrontation appear continuously in the descent. Subtle heat in the stone, faint shadows moving against corridors, and echoes that carry beyond expectation. Each indicator is noted, processed, and integrated into a framework of understanding that guides Gandalf's path. His approach demonstrates that preparation is iterative. Awareness shapes movement, reflection informs strategy, and anticipation guides ethical and tactical choices. The descent is thus both literal and symbolic, an exploration of the interface between ancient power and disciplined insight. By the end of this chapter, the descent illuminates the full integration of Gandalf's preparation, fear, and foresight. The mountain, the lingering presence of the Balrog, and the historical weight of the halls coalesce into an environment that tests perception, patience, and judgment. Gandalf's movement demonstrates that understanding a force as autonomous and persistent as the Balrog requires more than courage. It requires calibration of mind, body, and spirit. His descent is both a journey through stone and shadow, and a meditation on responsibility, anticipation, and the subtle influence of fear transformed into wisdom. In the next chapter, we will witness the first direct signs of the Balrog's presence, exploring how Gandalf interprets these indicators, responds with measured action, and prepares for the confrontation that will define the encounter. By observing the interaction of anticipation, perception, and the autonomous power of the Balrog, we gain insight into why Gandalf's fear is measured, profound, and deeply connected to both mandate and moral responsibility. Following Gandalf's careful descent into Moria, the first tangible signs of the Balrog's presence emerge. These signs are subtle, yet unmistakable, manifesting not as immediate threat, but as persistent influence that shapes perception, environment, and expectation. Shadows gather with a deliberate weight, stone retains the residual heat of fires long past, and echoes carry with a resonance that seems both natural and otherworldly. Gandalf interprets these signals not through panic but through disciplined observation, understanding that each clue represents a fragment of a larger pattern. Fear here becomes instructive, guiding attention, informing judgment, and shaping movement without dictating rash action. The mechanisms of these signs operate on multiple levels. Physically, the Balrog's presence alters space. Stone shudders subtly, air becomes perceptibly warmer, and the quality of light shifts in corridors and halls. Perceptually, these physical manifestations extend into the mind of the observer. Shadows seem to bend and move independently, and the faint echo of distant steps carries a psychological weight that induces caution. Gandalf recognizes that the Balrog's power is relational, extending through interaction with environment, perception, and even thought. Understanding this interactions is essential. Preparation alone is insufficient if one cannot read the influence of the creature on both terrain and mind. Breadcrumbs of history reinforce these signs. Moria, as a site of dwarven ambition and ancient disturbance, bears evidence of prior encounters, mistakes, and consequences. Collapsed ceilings, fissured stone, and residual heat are not random. They are the record of interactions between instinctive, primordial power and the ambition of those who disturbed it. Gandalf reads these signs, interpreting both immediate risk and the long-term patterns of consequence. This integration of history with observation forms a lattice of understanding, allowing him to anticipate not only the movements of the Balrog, but the subtle ways it shapes its surroundings and tests those who approach. The psychological dimension of this presence is profound. Gandalf notes the effect on himself and on potential companions, hesitation, slight shifts in perception, and the creeping awareness that space itself has changed. Such influence is a mechanism of control, not through direct action, but through persistent shaping of mind and environment. Understanding this allows Gandalf to maintain clarity. Fear is acknowledged, observed, and transformed into attention and insight. His discipline ensures that he interprets the signals accurately, balances caution with measured movement, and integrates observation with moral and strategic responsibility. Spatial navigation becomes an exercise in both perception and anticipation. Each corridor is approached with attention to subtle cues, shadows, temperature, acoustics, and lingering energy. Gandalf anticipates the effects of the Balrog's presence on the terrain, considering how each step might trigger or reveal influence. The mountain itself becomes a participant, offering resistance, guidance, and feedback. By attuning to these signals, Gandalf transforms fear into structured awareness, creating a path that maximizes insight and minimizes unnecessary risk. Preparation and perception operate in tandem, reflecting a synthesis of experience, knowledge, and instinct. Historical resonance continues to guide interpretation. The ruins of previous dwarven work, the patterns of collapse and disturbance, and the lingering signs of elemental interference all provide data. Gandalf's expertise in reading these signs is a form of anticipation, understanding not only what has occurred, but what is likely to occur under similar conditions. This capacity for inference, grounded in both observation and reflection, distinguishes his approach from mere reaction. The Balrog's influence is pervasive, yet structured according to elemental and instinctual principles. Gandalf's role is to navigate these principles with awareness, judgment, and moral clarity. Ethical consideration shapes his response. The Balrog is autonomous, instinctive, and persistent. Engagement carries consequence not only for Gandalf himself, but for those who follow or inhabit the space. Fear informs restraint, guiding Gandalf to act only when necessary, and with consideration for broader impact. His preparation is both practical and moral. Every choice reflects awareness of immediate danger, environmental influence, and the legacy of intervention. In this way, the encounter is approached not as conquest, but as careful stewardship of life, space, and history. As the signs grow clearer, anticipation becomes acute. Gandalf synthesizes observation, historical resonance, and spatial awareness into a coherent framework for action. The Balrog is neither visible nor directly aggressive, yet its presence is undeniable. Shadows, heat, and echo coalesce into a pattern of influence that both warns and teaches. Gandalf's response is measured. He observes, positions, and interprets, allowing fear to guide attention without dictating reckless action. Each signal informs the next, creating a continuous loop of perception, reflection, and adaptation that prepares him for the eventual confrontation. By the end of this chapter, the signs in the shadows illuminate the relational dynamics of the Balrog's power and Gandalf's approach. The creature's influence operates through environment, perception, and instinct, challenging conventional understanding and requiring both preparation and moral clarity. Gandalf's fear, far from a weakness, functions as an instrument of attention and insight, allowing him to navigate complex terrain, interpret subtle signals, and integrate historical patterns with immediate observation. His method demonstrates that unstructured, primordial terror requires disciplined anticipation, ethical responsibility, and deep engagement with both environment and history. In the next chapter, we will move from these preliminary signs to the first tangible encounter, observing how Gandalf positions himself, responds with both courage and calculation, and navigates the interplay of instinct, fear, and foresight. By tracing this first engagement, we gain insight into how preparation, observation, and moral responsibility converge in the face of a force that is older, autonomous, and fundamentally unstructured. Building upon the signs in the shadows, Gandalf now reaches the threshold of the Balrog's presence. The encounter is not abrupt but gradual, unfolding through observation, perception, and the accumulation of subtle cues. Moria, shaped by centuries of stone, shadow, and entropy, amplifies every indication of the creature's essence. The first glimpses are not of fire or form, but of influence, shifting shadows, rising heat, and a presence that asserts itself across space and mind. Gandalf, attuned through foresight and careful preparation, registers these signals as part of the larger pattern he has been tracing, integrating observation with moral clarity and strategic judgment. The mechanism of perception here is delicate. Gandalf interprets environmental cues, stone trembling faintly underfoot, temperature subtly rising, echoes shifting in irregular ways, as manifestations of the Balrog's essence interacting with the mountain. He understands that these effects are not random. They are extensions of instinctual power, unstructured yet patterned in a primordial way. Unlike Sauron, whose influence can be predicted through ambition, hierarchy, and desire, the Balrog's power is relational, autonomous, and persistent. Each ripple of influence carries both immediate consequence and latent resonance, shaping the environment and the perception of those who traverse it. Breadcrumbs from history deepen Gandalf's understanding. The ruins of Khazad-dûm's glory, the remnants of ambitious excavation, and the marks left by previous inhabitants are not merely evidence of past labor, but signals of consequence. The dwarves, through curiosity and ambition, intersected with a force whose scale, age, and independence they could not comprehend. Gandalf's study of these patterns allows him to anticipate effects, interpret signs, and prepare responses that are both strategic and morally informed. Fear here is instructive. It guides observation, calibrates judgment, and integrates ethical responsibility with the need for action. The psychological dimension of this first encounter is significant. The Balrog's presence subtly influences perception, inducing hesitation and heightening awareness simultaneously. Gandalf does not resist this effect, but incorporates it into his observational framework, using fear as a lens through which to interpret signals and anticipate potential outcomes. He notes the way shadows seem to gather with intent, the subtle heat that rises from stone as though alive, and the irregularity of echoes that hint at unseen movement. These cues inform both positioning and timing, allowing Gandalf to navigate the threshold without succumbing to panic or misjudgment. Spatial awareness is again critical. Moria's architecture, vast halls, narrow corridors, and echoing chambers, amplifies both presence and perception. Gandalf positions himself deliberately, noting lines of sight, potential barriers, and avenues for both engagement and retreat. The mountain itself communicates through its resistance and resonance, offering subtle guidance to those who observe closely. By aligning movement with environmental cues, Gandalf ensures that action remains informed, ethical, and precise, preserving both the integrity of his mandate and the safety of those around him. The relational dynamics of this encounter extend beyond immediate threat. The Balrog's influence interacts with perception, environment, and history, creating a network of subtle pressures that demand careful navigation. Gandalf's foresight allows him to anticipate how instinctual behavior will manifest, how environmental factors amplify presence, and how accumulated consequence shapes the trajectory of the encounter. In this context, fear functions as an instrument of clarity, directing attention to risk, consequence, and ethical responsibility, without undermining action or judgment. Strategic preparation is evident in Gandalf's decisions. Each movement, pause, and observation is deliberate, calibrated to maintain balance between anticipation and engagement. He does not confront blindly, but positions himself according to both environmental advantage and moral constraint. Observation and reflection occur continuously, integrating sensory input, historical insight, and foresight to create a coherent response to a force that operates outside conventional understanding. The encounter thus becomes a study in the management of unstructured, autonomous power through disciplined perception, ethical awareness, and strategic positioning. Spiritual alignment informs the approach. Gandalf's mandate as Istari requires that he act not out of dominance, but through guidance, protection, and moral clarity. This ethical perspective shapes every aspect of the encounter. How he positions himself, interprets the Balrog's influence, and anticipates outcomes. Fear, carefully observed, ensures that decisions honor responsibility and respect both the autonomous power of the creature and the potential consequences of action. Gandalf's discipline transforms apprehension into insight, allowing him to navigate the first threshold with clarity, composure, and purpose. By the end of this first encounter, Gandalf has registered the full weight of the Balrog's presence without direct engagement. The mountain, shadows, and residual echoes all communicate aspects of its power, offering information through indirect but unmistakable signs. Gandalf's integration of observation, foresight, and ethical judgment ensures that he maintains agency and clarity, even as he approaches a force whose scale, age, and autonomy defy ordinary comprehension. The encounter exemplifies the convergence of preparation, perception, and moral responsibility, demonstrating that fear, when observed and integrated, becomes an instrument of wisdom rather than a source of paralysis. In the next chapter, we will witness the initial confrontation, where Gandalf moves from observation to action. By tracing this moment, we will gain insight into how preparation, anticipation, and moral clarity manifest in engagement, revealing the delicate balance required to face a being that is both autonomous and primordial, and illuminating why Gandalf's dread of the Balrog surpasses even his apprehension of Sauron. Having observed the subtle signs of the Balrog's presence, Gandalf now stands at the threshold of direct confrontation. This moment is not defined by spectacle, but by measured awareness. Shadows deepen, heat intensifies, and the mountain itself seems to respond to the latent energy of the creature. Moria's vast corridors amplify both perception and influence, ensuring that each step, each breath, carries significance. Gandalf's fear, informed by foresight, preparation, and moral responsibility, serves as a guide rather than a hindrance. It allows him to align observation, action, and principle, transforming apprehension into a framework for deliberate engagement. The mechanisms at play in this threshold are multifaceted. The Balrog's power manifests through space, perception and instinct rather than conscious strategy. Shadows shift independently, sound travels unpredictably, and residual heat warps perception. Gandalf interprets these cues as extensions of the creature's essence, understanding that its influence operates according to principles that are primordial, autonomous, and enduring. Unlike Sauron, whose power is bound by ambition, hierarchy, and intent, the Balrog's essence interacts with the world in a diffuse and unpredictable way, requiring both anticipation and disciplined responsiveness. Breadcrumbs of history remain critical in informing Gandalf's positioning and movement. The ruins of dwarven industry, collapsed ceilings, and long-abandoned halls serve not only as warnings, but as data points that reveal patterns of consequence. Past attempts to engage or provoke the Balrog ended in devastation, providing Gandalf with insight into the relationship between instinctual power and structural vulnerability. By integrating these historical traces into his understanding, he aligns perception with action, translating observation into a strategic and ethical framework that prepares him to act when engagement becomes necessary. Psychological preparedness is essential at the threshold. Gandalf recognizes that the Balrog's presence exerts influence not only on the physical environment, but on perception, inducing hesitation and subtle shifts in awareness. He allows fear to inform attention, heightening vigilance while preventing rash decisions. Each movement is deliberate, each pause allows reflection. This calibration of attention ensures that action occurs at the most opportune moment, and that the ethical and strategic dimensions of engagement remain aligned with his mandate as an Istari. Fear becomes a tool, shaping insight and guiding judgment without overriding reason. Spatial mastery complements psychological readiness. The architecture of Moria, the intersecting corridors, the vast halls, and the echoing chambers creates both opportunity and constraint. Gandalf positions himself deliberately, anticipating how shadows, acoustics, and residual energy will interact with movement. Awareness of potential retreat, line of sight, and structural vulnerabilities ensures that action remains calculated, precise, and minimally disruptive. Here, the mountain itself functions as a participant, its form and history providing subtle guidance to those attuned to its signals. Every step is informed by both environmental observation and moral responsibility. Strategic foresight is layered into this preparation. Gandalf anticipates how the Balrog will respond to stimuli, considering instinctual patterns, spatial relationships, and environmental amplification. Unlike engagement with a sentient strategist such as Sauron, the Balrog responds according to instinctual, elemental imperatives. Understanding this allows Gandalf to align movement, observation, and timing in ways that respect both the creature's autonomy and the imperatives of his own mandate. Preparation, in this sense, is not simply defensive, but relational, responding to dynamic influence rather than imposing static control. Ethical consideration is interwoven with tactical awareness. Gandalf does not act out of aggression or dominance. His engagement is guided by responsibility, foresight, and protection of others. Every decision is informed by the potential consequences of action, the autonomy of the creature, and the enduring impact of intervention on the environment and those who follow. Fear, carefully observed, functions as a measure of both risk and moral alignment, ensuring that movement, positioning, and anticipation remain integrated with the broader purpose of stewardship rather than conquest. Historical and symbolic resonance continues to shape the threshold. The ruins of past dwarven ambition, the residual effects of prior disturbances, and the echoing presence of primordial energy all inform Gandalf's understanding of the consequences of engagement. These cues reinforce the distinction between structured threat and autonomous terror. Sauron's machinations could be studied, anticipated, and mitigated, whereas the Balrog's influence operates outside conventional strategy. Gandalf's approach demonstrates the integration of observation, historical awareness, and ethical foresight, showing that engagement with unstructured power requires more than courage. It demands insight, discipline, and responsibility. As the threshold moment crystallizes, Gandalf embodies a synthesis of preparation, observation, and moral clarity. The Balrog, while not yet fully revealed, communicates its presence through environmental cues and instinctual energy. Shadows, heat, and resonance converge to create a palpable, persistent influence, demanding attention and respect. Gandalf's readiness reflects the integration of multiple faculties: psychological, spiritual, strategic, and ethical, ensuring that the forthcoming engagement will be approached with the full measure of insight, foresight, and principle. By the end of this chapter, the threshold of confrontation has revealed why Gandalf's fear is profound and justified. It is not a reaction to immediate threat alone, but a reflection of understanding, preparation, and respect for forces that operate outside conventional comprehension. The careful calibration of fear, observation, and moral alignment ensures that when the encounter unfolds, Gandalf is prepared not only to face the Balrog, but to navigate the relational, environmental, and ethical complexities that such a force imposes. In the next chapter, we will witness the first tangible clash, tracing how Gandalf engages, responds, and maneuvers as the Balrog emerges into view. This will illuminate the dynamics of instinct, foresight, and moral responsibility converging in direct interaction, revealing why this confrontation demanded both courage and profound understanding, and why Gandalf's fear transcends even that inspired by Sauron. Having reached the threshold of Moria's deepest halls, Gandalf now faces the Balrog directly. This moment is not defined by spectacle or sudden eruption, but by a deliberate, measured engagement informed by observation, preparation, and moral clarity. The Balrog's presence is immediate, yet inscrutable. Shadows shift with intent, heat radiates through the stone, and echoes carry a resonance that communicates both power and persistence. Gandalf's fear, honed through foresight and disciplined attention, serves as guidance rather than paralysis. Each movement is deliberate, each pause reflective, aligning insight, courage, and ethical responsibility with action. The mechanisms of engagement are complex. Unlike Sauron, whose schemes can be anticipated through motive, hierarchy, or logic, the Balrog operates according to instinct, elemental force, and primordial essence. Shadows gather in patterns that suggest movement and intent. Temperature fluctuations signal presence and proximity, and sound travels irregularly, creating a dynamic that requires continuous interpretation. Gandalf reads these cues, integrating them with historical knowledge, environmental awareness, and ethical consideration. Fear, carefully observed, functions as a compass, directing attention to the creature's influence, the terrain, and the moral consequences of action. Breadcrumbs from history inform every decision. The ruins of Khazad-dûm, fissured stone, and remnants of previous dwarven efforts illustrate both consequence and scale. Gandalf understands that engagement with this being carries cost not only in immediate terms, but across time, affecting lives, history, and the preservation of balance in Middle-earth. Observation of these markers allows him to anticipate patterns of instinctive response, environmental interaction, and structural vulnerability. Each action is measured, informed, and aligned with both strategy and ethical principle. The psychological dimension of confrontation is profound. The Balrog's presence subtly manipulates perception, inducing heightened attention, hesitation, and awareness of space in ways that are difficult to articulate. Gandalf allows fear to inform observation rather than dictate behavior, transforming dread into focused insight. Each shift in shadow, each tremor of stone, each echo of movement contributes to an ongoing assessment, guiding positioning, timing, and intervention. Here, mental discipline and attentional control function as mechanisms of both safety and strategic advantage. Spatial awareness is critical. The halls of Moria, with their intersecting corridors, cavernous chambers, and echoing surfaces, amplify presence and perception. Gandalf positions himself deliberately, anticipating how the Balrog's instinctual influence interacts with space, movement, and observation. Lines of sight, structural resistance, and potential avenues for maneuver all inform choices, allowing engagement to occur within a framework of controlled interaction rather than reactive confrontation. The mountain itself, as environment and archive of consequence, becomes a partner in the navigation of this complex encounter. Strategic foresight integrates observation with anticipation. Gandalf considers the likely expressions of instinctual power, the way the Balrog interacts with its environment, and how spatial features might shape engagement. Unlike dealing with sentient strategy, where intentions can be inferred, the Balrog's influence emerges organically through instinct and the principles of primordial energy. Gandalf's preparation ensures that each move accounts for both immediate response and cascading consequences, creating a relational interaction in which anticipation and perception guide action. Ethical grounding shapes every decision. Gandalf does not act from dominance or aggression, but from responsibility, foresight, and protection of life and history. The Balrog is autonomous, persistent, and elemental, and every action carries moral as well as tactical consequence. Fear, when integrated, functions as an instrument of clarity, ensuring that movement, positioning, and timing are aligned with both principle and insight. Gandalf's engagement exemplifies the integration of courage, preparation, and ethical responsibility, demonstrating how understanding and anticipation mitigate risk without sacrificing integrity. The historical and symbolic context amplifies the depth of engagement. Fissured stone, residual heat, and collapsed corridors illustrate the consequences of prior attempts to disturb or engage the Balrog. Gandalf interprets these cues not as obstacles, but as instructive signals, providing insight into how instinctual power interacts with environment, perception, and consequence. Unlike Sauron, whose schemes can be mitigated through strategy, the Balrog challenges comprehension and requires nuanced understanding. Gandalf's approach demonstrates the synthesis of historical awareness, observation, and ethical foresight in real-time engagement with an autonomous, unstructured force. By the culmination of this chapter, the confrontation has moved from threshold to initial engagement. Gandalf, informed by preparation, observation, and moral clarity, responds to the Balrog's autonomous presence with measured attention, ethical alignment, and strategic positioning. Shadows, heat, and resonance communicate patterns that inform each action, creating a dialogue of perception, anticipation, and response. This careful calibration ensures that the engagement remains deliberate, responsible, and informed, emphasizing the relational, environmental, and moral dimensions of facing a primordial force. In the next chapter, we will trace the consequences and aftermath of this confrontation, observing how Gandalf's preparation, perception, and ethical guidance interact with the raw, autonomous power of the Balrog. This will reveal not only the immediate tactical dynamics, but the enduring lessons of fear, foresight, and responsibility in the face of forces older and more elemental than any structured tyrant, illuminating why Gandalf's dread of the Balrog surpasses even his apprehension of Sauron.